So, good morning. Today is Monday, the 8th of September. This is macroeconomics. All of that is for my reference when I edit this video. I'm trying to post most of our classes on video onto my YouTube channel, and then I'll give you the links on Canvas in the form of an announcement in case you want to go back and revisit some of the things we may have discussed. What's on your mind?
Have you ever read the book The Richest Man in Baumol?
This one?
Yeah, I just started reading it.
That was not planned. Where did you? Who referenced you that book?
My brother, but he's like big into philosophy, and so he actually just let me borrow it like this past weekend.
I'm so glad I got that on video. Dr. Stevenson, who teaches in our business administration programs, Principles of Management and Intro to Business, gave me this. And I'm still working my way through it, just started it. But the little bit that I've read, it's an absolutely wonderful book about money and wealth and the accumulation of wealth. And it takes as an environment or a setting the ancient city of Babylon, one of the richest city on earth at the time.
It was really interesting. So when he explained it to me, he was like, "You should read this book, Allie." I was like, "Okay." And it's a short novel, so you can read it in a day. Of course, I can't read that fast and not that focused.
To me, it's too good a book to read in a day.
Yeah.
A really good book, to me, you read 2 or 3 pages and you go, man, you sit down and you think about it. You get a martini and you read it. Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I just started like the chapters this morning, but.
And I think, I don't recall if I told you in this class, what's his first key to getting rich?
10% saving.
Save 10%, at least 10 cents on every dollar that you earn for the rest of your life.
I believe in the book, my brother was telling me that he was saying 10% is yours to keep. Because
Yes.
when you
Pay yourself first.
pay yourself first, and because when you buy something, it's like, oh, you have to buy shoes, so your shoe's going to go to the shoemaker. It's like, so it never really was yours in the first place. Or like the tailor, it's like you have to pay the tailor. That money was never yours in the first place. But 10% is yours to keep.
That's right. There's some things you have to pay for. And then there's other things you don't have to pay for. And if you pay yourself instead of paying for those things, drink cheap beer. You pay yourself 10 cents on every dollar you earn. It's amazing how that can accumulate. Let's do something here just for a quick illustration. I'll make it kind of round numbers, not too difficult to play with. What would happen if you saved $100 a month? $100 a month, and you did that for 30 years, and you could earn maybe stock market average 8%. How much money would you have in 30 years? And this is a compound interest problem, so a financial calculator is necessary, but if you saved $100, making 8%, and you did it for 30 years, that's 360 months, you would wind up with, I don't know, how much of the money did you put in? You put in $100 times 360, isn't that right? You put in $100 360 times, right? So you put in $36,000 out of your pocket. You okay with that? That's how much you put in. At the end of 30 years, you would have $149,035 for a $30,000 out-of-pocket investment, $100 a month. How would that make you feel in 30 years? And why don't more people do that?
They don't have financial calculator.
Most people are short-run oriented, and they look at what can I do with that money today to enjoy it, as opposed to having it go to work for me, and that's the way the book phrases it. Have it go to work for me and generate me some income over my lifetime. They don't think that way. They're too caught up in you know, you got to get the newest iPhone, you got to get the newest app or whatever, you got to get this, got to get that, you got to get the other. And so they maximize their short-term enjoyments and interests at the cost of their long-run success. How did $36,000 become $149,000?
8%.
What is compound interest? The interest earns interest on itself. If you put $100 in the bank and it earns 8% in a year, would be real easy. At the end of the first year, you got $108, right? Well, do you understand that now you have $100 of your own working for you that you put in, and that $100 generated $8 more to work for you. So now you get 8% of that the second year. How much is that? 64. Yeah. Instead of 8 cents, you get 8.64 cents the second year. And that extra 0.64 cents builds and builds and builds, and that's all money that's working for you that you don't have to lift a finger for. So that's kind of the theme of the book. Even Einstein is supposed to have said, compound interest is the most powerful force in the universe. And it can work for you, or you can go out and borrow money and it'll work against you. What happens when you buy a house? If you buy a house and the bank loans you $100,000, and they're charging you 6% interest on your loan. The first month you own that house, and we can do the payment here, but basically the first month you own your house, if your payment was $700, it wouldn't be that much. If your payment was $650, $600 of that first payment you made on that house was interest to the bank. It didn't pay off your house. It was just interest on the borrowed money. You believe that? You buy a house on a 30-year mortgage, you don't really start paying a whole lot for the house until about the 15th year, 12th or 15th year. In the first part of your mortgage, almost everything you're paying is interest on borrowed money. And that's the bank using compound interest to its advantage and your disadvantage. How much interest is there, do you think, among your peer groups in personal finance and financial management? Scale is 0 to 10. 10 means, boy, they'd love to learn more about it, and 0 means don't know, don't care, don't want to be bothered. Anybody take a guess? 2. 2? Anybody else? Your response is somewhat indicative, isn't it? I built a personal finance course out here about 8 years ago. 3-credit hour course. Elective, didn't count for general education, just an elective. You know how many students took that course out of, at that time, about 15,000 students? I had 6 to 9 students per term. That was it.
Do you still teach it?
No.
I was going to say, I didn't see it.
We haven't offered it in at least 5 years. We offered it for 2, or maybe 2 years, and the enrollment was so low, canceled. Now, is that good news or bad news?
It's terrible news.
It's terrible news for us as a macro economy. It means we have an awful lot of Americans out there who are really, and there's no other word for it, ignorant about their finances. And when you're ignorant, you often make stupid decisions. And so we see people going heavily into debt. We see people getting so far into debt that they cannot pay those debts, and then they lose their credit ratings. Then they're having a difficult time borrowing into the future. But nobody cares enough to want to go take those classes, or very few. The good news is, if you can figure out how to take advantage of those people, they're dumb enough, you can get rich. How about that? All right. Anything else on your mind? I got a dozen things to talk about. Entertain you with your ideas first. Anything at all?
The Arab League is pushing towards, same topic from last week, the Arab League is pushing towards making action.
The Arab League, who's the Arab League?
Quite a few Middle Eastern countries.
Yeah, I don't remember the number. I want to say 22, but that's a WAG. Remember WAG? It's a WAG. Anybody here know what a WAG is? It's a wild ass guess. My WAG is 22, 24
I think
Arabian
it's like 7 or
countries.
8 that I read in the newspaper.
They are trying to get the Arab League to all join together on board and condemn the Islamic State, IS, or ISIL, and produce some joint action against them, not just military, but economic and social. So, yeah, everybody is beginning to recognize that, and we're going to use the term the Islamic State, meaning that group of extremists in Syria and Iraq who are trying to establish their own Islamic caliphate. More and more people are beginning to recognize they are a very serious threat to the stability of the region, particularly because they are Sunni and they are aggravating the differences between Sunni and Shia and possibly going to cause more violence and destruction. Anything else going on? Anybody here go to the Gator game? Anybody? One? Two? Once the Gators aren't too popular this year? Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Well, in my show and tell, then, okay, here's what I've got. Some of it related to the textbook and some of it more general, which is why I'm trying to capture it on video. I think it was this class, someone asked the question, when did the second industrial revolution begin? Is that right? Anybody ask that? What was the industrial revolution?
The rise of the power industry, or like those industries, like instead of the person making shirts in their house, they built factories up and then it became more assembly line labor.
Good. It was the first, if you will, technological tidal wave that improved our ability to produce more and more goods and not services as much, but goods, or production of goods. Whether it was using mills to weave textiles, or eventually building foundries to produce steel and products made from steel. When did the Industrial Revolution begin? Ballpark.
Late 1800s.
Actually, late 1700s. What we call the late 18th century. But when is the 18th century? 1701, 1701 to 1799. What was the first century? From the year 0 to the year 99. So in the year 100, you began the second century. So when we say the Industrial Revolution began in the mid-18th century, we're talking, give or take, 1750.
I said 1800s. I said 1800s.
You said 1800s, and in fact, it's a little bit before that, and we'll make that a point. One of the sources we want to discuss in this class is a book by Adam Smith. There's a series called The Wealth of, or the short title to it, The Wealth of Nations. And I'm hoping you will know the entire long title of the book, which is an inquiry into the nature and causes of the wealth of nations. We want to look at what is the wealth of nations. How do you measure the wealth of a country? How would you measure the wealth of the United States today? Y'all going to make me start calling on you by name, aren't you? We can do that. Sir?
How well off the citizens are?
Say again.
How well off the citizens are? Like,
How well off the citizens are? How would you measure how well off I am or you are?
just how you live your life, like having food, clothes on your back.
Standard of living, we would call it, sort of like. Do we have a quantitative measure of that in the United States?
Per capita.
Say again.
GDP per capita.
We can measure gross domestic product per capita. GDP per capita. Well, as it turns out, GDP, gross domestic product, is one of our macroeconomic measures we use a lot. And we'll be talking about it in much more depth as this course goes along. But it's basically a measure of how much stuff did we produce and buy as a country. how many tires and motorcycles and pool tables and cases of beer did we produce? Gross domestic product. There are some problems in that measurement. You know, we can't be really precise, but at least it's an approximation. If we can measure how much stuff we produced and purchased, the next question to ask is, how much is that per person? We call that per capita, per head. So we take GDP, the number of dollars spent, divided by the population. And that's our GDP per capita. And if our GDP per capita was, let's just guess, I don't know, $28,000. What does that number mean, 28,000? Means on the average American was able to purchase about $28,000 worth of stuff. Or produced that much. On the average. What's the problem with the word on the phrase on the average? Sorry.
You can have great disparities between high and low.
If I brought 5 players from the NBA into this room, what would be their average height? 6'4". 6'4" to 6'6", I don't know. 6'8", I don't know. So if I brought 5 of those guys in, and I brought in 5 guys my height, what would our average height be? 5'11", 6 foot, 6'1". Would anybody in the room be 6'1" or 5'11"? Not a soul. None of us. Got a bunch of little short guys, a bunch of big tall guys. So averages can be horribly misleading. That's why, hopefully, you'll acquaint yourself with some statistics somewhere that says, if the average is this is how much variation there is around that average. Okay? So statistics can become more meaningful. Unfortunately, when we measure per capita GDP, we're taking the average. The average American produced this much. We might also measure income. How much money did people make per person, per capita? Income divided by population. And if we said, well, the average income in the United States was, I don't know, $31,000, what does that $31,000 mean? Not a hell of a lot by itself. Does that mean we're doing good? Well, on average.
It could be even less.
Say again.
It could be even less.
Could be less. There are many countries where it is much less. Okay? So on an average basis, we're doing very well as a country.
No, I'm saying in reality, if you count, so you have people that earn $1 billion or maybe, I don't know, $100 million a year.
Yeah.
And that's counting, that's giving the average more money than it actually gives.
Yeah, if you had a few people making billions of dollars, what would the others have to be making to bring the average down to 32?
1 to 2 million.
Yeah, a couple $100 a week or a month. You know? So averages are very, very misleading. But they're a rough approximation to start a conversation on what is the wealth of our nations. A good argument. We're trying to measure it. Jumping a little bit ahead, actually as part of today's topics, Smith begins, well, let me make my major point. This book came out in 1776. And I'm suggesting the Industrial Revolution started around 1750, when we found out about producing more efficiently, sometimes in large quantities, sometimes on production lines. Smith spends a part of his book talking about the production of pins, those sewing needles or straight pins, you know. And he talks about if one person takes this long metal rod and he cuts off a piece and then he sharpens the tip and then he puts a little head on it, and then he does another one. How many pins can he produce in a day? And he says, in the alternative, what if you had one person bringing in those long rods and laying them out where they need to be, another person who was clipping them and passing them down, another person who was sharpening them, and another person who was putting the head on the pin? Could you increase the production of pins more than just those 5 people by themselves? Answer, oh, hell yes. Well, bingo, there's the Industrial Revolution. The discovery that there are better ways to do things than pure self-sufficiency, than producing everything for yourself. So I'm going to suggest we start the Industrial Revolution around 1750, And then that leads us into Smith's revelatory book about, given this ability to produce more and more, how does that affect the wealth of a nation? And he says, well, the first thing going on is we're measuring the wealth of the nation today, 1750s, what's going on in the world in the 1750s? So again, not so much, just think of, say, maybe anywhere from 1650 till 1800. Maybe go back to 1450.
Imperialism, colonialism.
Colonialism. What is colonialism?
Creation of colonies for
Creating colonies.
the purpose of getting gold, silver, and...
You bet. We, the nation, the Netherlands as an example, they were very good at it. We build a navy, we build an army, and we send them around the world to establish colonies, where these colonies will produce goods and produce precious metals for us to use back in the mother country. Okay, so you hear of the Dutch colonies, Dutch East India, etc. And the way the politicians at the time tended to view how strong and wealthy is our country was in terms of our armies and our navies, and therefore in terms of the amount of gold we have to support them. And so the focus for the policymakers was, let's maximize the amount of gold coming into our country through trade, through war, whatever. This system is called mercantilism. It says, bring the most money into your country that you can. Mercantilism. There's a little problem with that. And we'll take a quick, simple example. Let's take Great Britain trading with France. Great Britain produces great textiles. Their factories are very efficient, produce good quality. They sell textiles to France in return for gold. And so the British think this is a good deal because we're getting wealthier. The French, on the other hand, they're selling wine to Great Britain in return for gold. And for the French, that part of the deal is a good deal because we're getting wealthier. But if each country wants to get wealthy, what's the next iteration in this argument? What would you do if you were Great Britain and you wanted to bring in more gold than went out?
Start producing wine.
Yeah, but British wine just doesn't cut it. It's not very good quality. Nobody wants to drink it. You put a tax on wine. Not with that pen. It's amazing how many pens we have. We put a tax or a tariff on wine, so that anytime somebody buys French wine, it costs them a lot of money, and they stop buying all that damn French wine. That way, we don't have as much gold going out. We still have gold coming in. We are so smart. You with me? Now, if you were French, what would you do? You're losing jobs. You're losing gold. You turn around and do the same thing. We will put a French tariff on textiles. That'll teach the Brits. Now what has happened? Britain can't export textiles because they're being taxed so heavily, so the people working in the British textile industries are losing jobs. And Britain itself is bringing in less gold. At the same time in France, they've lost jobs in the wine business, and they're bringing in less gold. This is called a trade war. When we try to restrict the amount of stuff people send to us so we can increase our well-being. What's the problem with all of that together when you put it together, working at both of these at the same time? You're losing huge numbers of jobs. Both countries are receiving less gold now. And what has happened to the quality of life in those countries? You have lots of unemployment, lots of people without jobs. You understand that? So what may seem a good thing for you to do as a separate country, if everything in the world remained constant, that would be a smart thing, tax imports. But when you apply that micro logic of one country to the macro world, it's not good, it's terrible. We call that the fallacy of composition. What's good for one is not necessarily good for everybody at the same time. The fallacy means an error in reasoning. The fallacy of composition. You will hear that repeatedly throughout this course in different ways. You're going to hear me refer to it throughout the course as the paradox of macroeconomics. What is good for a single person, business, or country is bad, sometimes is bad, if everybody does it at the same time. Smith examines this. These were the trade wars. He called them the corn wars, because a lot of the goods being exported or imported were grains. And he says, what this system of mercantile does is destroy the wealth of a country, the wealth of a nation. It destroys it. It doesn't cause that country to prosper. So, having dismantled, if you will, the arguments for mercantilism, Smith then goes on to develop what he views to be a better political/economic system, particularly economic system, we now refer to as capitalism. Sometimes referred to as free market economies. Free market. Any idea what free markets mean?
Laws or constrictions on
Run your business however the hell you want to, with no restrictions, and maximize your profits. Did Smith say to do that? Smith said this. He said, if you will take every citizen in your country and don't try to tell them what to do, leave them free to do whatever they want, what will each person do? Is that mine or yours? I don't know. What will each person do? If we were adrift on a desert island, you and I in this class and just us on this island, and you were free to do anything you want, what would you do? How would you support yourself? It's a rather profound question if you look at it. What would you do?
Figure it out.
Say again?
Figure it out.
Figure it out.
Find the most efficient way to do it. Do something.
Find a more efficient way to do it. Be a little more specific, anybody.
You find something that everybody else needs and start producing it.
What would you do in that vein?
I don't know, you could you can climb well, so you go find all the coconuts and
Perfect.
start selling
If you're a good climber, you go in the coconut business. Anybody else here, any business you would go into? Huh? Fishing. I'd be out there fishing. You know? And how much fish would I want to catch?
as much as you could.
Way more than I personally need. Why?
You
What
can
do we
trade
call
it
it?
for coconut.
So I can build a surplus for myself. Until I can accumulate a surplus, I can't trade. Okay? What would you do? Anybody else?
Purify the soul.
Say again?
Purify the
Figure out, pure it up. Okay, how to, let it evaporate, at least save the salt, maybe save the condensate. Got fresh water. Anybody else got an idea?
Build boats.
Build boats. You can build boats. Huh?
And shelter.
Build shelter. Anybody here like to hunt? Anybody want to learn? We get together and we go out and either build spears and bows and arrows and go hunt the wild hogs on the island. Or, why don't we just go trap them and raise them? Domesticate them. If I got a big old hog farm and I'm furnishing all the pork meat for this whole damned island, you think I'm going to be doing okay? For most of you, you're going to be wanting some of that, and what's it going to take for me to give you any pork? You got to give me what?
Fish.
What I want. Now, Smith is trying to describe this, and he uses an interesting term. He says, if you leave people alone to do what they want to, each person will act as though he's being led by an invisible hand. invisible hand, and you'll hear this referred to, the invisible hand of capitalism, or the invisible hand of Adam Smith. Each person will be led as though by an invisible hand, listen carefully, to work to the benefit of his neighbor, to do things to help or provide for his neighbor. What is he saying? Each person will go out and try to work to help his neighbor. When people first read that passage, they said, Adam is referring to God. God will lead each person to be beneficent and helpful to his neighbor. No, that's not what he meant. He didn't mean God. He meant greed. If you want to get what you want, you've got to give me what I want. If you figure out that the biggest thing we don't have on this island is shoes, and you learn how to make good shoes, are you going to get rich? Insofar as we measure rich on our island? Sure you are. That each person will work in such a way as to provide people with what they want in order to earn money or wealth for himself, and therefore raise his standard of living. Now, did it take any sort of governmental organization, or you and I, to organize some kind of government to tell everybody what to do under this system? No. Advocates of free markets suggest that you need to leave people with the maximum possible economic freedom to go out and start whatever kind of businesses they want and run them as efficiently as they can. Because if I can produce shoes really cheap, I can sell them to you really cheap. But if you tell me all my shoes have to meet all these criteria and the cost of those shoes go up, some of you can't afford them. Now, in describing this, he talks about the finance minister from Louis XIV, I think, who had traveled around France around this time asking the French merchants and farmers. He said, I'm from the king. We want to increase how much you people produce. We want you to produce more stuff. What can we do? I'm from the government. What can we do to help you? And the response from the French, the merchants and the farmers, was laissez-faire. Today. Laissez-faire. And so from that in American, of course, we say, well, laissez-faire. So we talk about laissez-faire capitalism. Laissez-faire. Anybody got enough French to translate that? Literally? Hands off. In America, we shorten it and kind of bastardize it in a way. We say it means hands off. What it literally means is you leave us to be. You're from the government. You're here to help us. Just leave us the hell alone. Hands off. Okay? So you'll hear the term laissez-faire in a lot of different applications. But laissez-faire generally means let it fix itself. Let it work by itself. Can you imagine a manager of a business or a department who had a laissez-faire attitude? What's his attitude towards his employees, his workers? Do what you want. Do what you want. How involved is he going to be in looking after you and seeing what you're doing and checking on you and everything else? No. Laissez-faire management is a term that is frequently used to criticize a manager who doesn't do anything. This laissez-faire approach to management is allowing our company to go to hell. That ain't going to work. Do you, in any of your experiences, remember ever meeting a student with a laissez-faire approach towards school? Laissez-faire. Yeah, don't worry about it. Let it happen. Let it work like it wants to. Side note on that. Laissez-faire students. Have you run across the term academically adrift? Have you heard that anywhere in the news articles? Anybody describing American education? What does adrift mean? For something to be adrift.
Isn't it like floating at sea, like no control?
Yeah, it's like a boat with no rudder, no sails, no oars. It's just drifting, adrift. What do you suppose academically adrift means with respect to students? Y'all making this hard on me today. Yes, sir.
They're just letting it happen. whatever it was on.
Okay, how would that student behave? I mean, what would be an indicator? Say again? Nonchalant in what way? Give me examples.
They don't have any goals.
No goals? Okay, what else?
No direction.
No direction? But what are the symptoms of that? We know that that's their mental attitude. What do we witness in their behaviors that indicates they are academically adrift?
They go to class.
They don't go to class?
They sleep when they go to class.
Sorry.
Their body falls
They
asleep.
sleep in class, particularly in economics.
They don't do assignments.
They don't do assignments, homework, reading.
Don't study.
They don't study.
Not motivated.
Don't ask for it.
They frequently come to class, and can you believe this? They don't get involved in the conversation. They don't engage. What else?
Wait till the last minute with assignments.
They wait till the last minute. What time a day is the latest time I can turn in my term paper? Okay. You think that happens a lot? Not sure of their major, right? Dropping classes every time it gets a little tough or whatever. What happens to these people in college? How do they do as they go through college? We generally see that they have. I'm sorry?
So they get worse and worse until they flunk out or
Well,
drop out?
if you looked at the number of people that drop out of college, I think personally 90% of them are academically adrift. They have no focus, no goals, no motivation, no support group. Didn't we do the exercise about your 5 best friends in here?
No.
Did we? Some of us did. I don't know.
We didn't do it.
We didn't?
No.
Oh, let's do that real quick, okay? Take you just 30, just a second. In the margin of your notes, because nobody's ever going to read it, I want you to write something down for me. I want you to write down the names of the 5 people in your life that you spend most of your time with. That could be on the telephone with mom or dad, but the 5 people, just their first name, the 5 people you spend most of your time with, interacting. Your dog doesn't count. Some of you are struggling, so if you have to go with 4, that's okay. Below that list, add one more name, your own. Next to each name, I want you to give them a score from 0 to 10. Let me tell you what that means. A person who's a 10 is the best supporter, encourager, helper, cheerleader you could possibly have. This is a person who's doing everything in their power to help you succeed. A 9 is pretty damn good. An 8 is pretty damn good. A 7 is still positive. Someone with a score of 5 is neutral. They're not negative. They're not holding you back, but they're not doing anything to help you or encourage you or motivate you. Someone with a 4 or a 3 or even a 2 is a kind of an anchor. They're a negative person. They discourage you. They don't want to get involved and help you move along. Someone with a 1 or a 0 is your drug supplier or your pimp. Okay. Put a score next to every name, including your own. This is very private. Nobody's ever going to see it. When you've got a score next to every name, add them up. Add the total.
Including your own.
Including your own. What's the maximum you could have?
60.
5 friends and you. 60. Right? You could have a maximum of 60. If you told me your score was 60, I know you're lying. Okay?
We got 60.
But here's my rough rule of thumb, and you can change the numbers to suit yourself. But if you've got a score that's below about 40, 42, 45, what do you need to do?
Someone out.
You need to drop kick a couple of people out of your life. I say that from experience. I've done it, and it works. You need to choose people to spend your time with who bring you up, not bring you down. Think about this. You will be, over the course of your life, you will be, starting today, you will be the average of the people you spend time with. You won't be the best. You'll be the average of the people you spend time with. So if most of the people you spend time with are 7s and 5s, maybe a 6. You think people have that big an influence on you? Every bit of research that's out there says that. They have a huge influence on you. They encourage you with your positive behaviors, you do more of it. If they discourage your positive behaviors, you do less of it. Okay? So, if you take someone who is academically adrift, what could you probably imagine about that group of 5 friends?
Probably the same.
Same thing. Playing on the same ball. You remember the story of John Spence? When he went to the University of Miami? His best friends, what about them?
Oh, yeah.
They were all the same. All of them bounced out of Miami for failing. Okay. What we find with academically adrift students, and we can do it as simply as looking at grade point averages. We find typically the ones with low GPAs, down around a 2, 2.0, 2.3, don't do very well in college, and now we've got studies out tracing them back for 25 years, following up with them. What do you suppose we found? They're the same students who were first fired on their jobs, the first ones to go in a layoff. They're the same students who did not progress up promotion-wise in their jobs. They're the same students who have made bad decisions with respect to relationships, money, life decisions. We're seeing that. That people who are academically adrift in school, the bulk, not all, the bulk of them remain academically, or if you will, professionally adrift in their lives. But that ties in with another point that came out of chapter 16. We'll get back to Smith here maybe next class. What's going on with the American education system? Good, bad, indifferent?
Bad.
Is it bad? Sorry?
We used to be number 1 in there.
Yeah, someone said exhaust or something.
Back in the 1950s, 1960s, the American school year was 180 days per year. That was the longest school year in the developed countries. Why do you suppose the school year was so short before this in America as well as in other countries?
Farming practice.
Because education was not essential to success, but children were essential to help in the agricultural operations of their families and other family duties. Okay. We moved to a 180-day school year in 1950. It was the longest school year in the world. By 1990, it was the shortest school year in the developed countries. If you look at countries like Korea, so you look at Singapore, you look at China, etc., you're looking at school years that typically run anywhere from 210 to 270 days. Now, I'm not saying that's the solution. I'm a big believer that too much of anything will kill you. But think what's happening academically to the students in other countries. And we're seeing this on the standardized exams. They're better at math, they're better at science, they're better at languages, they're better at everything than average Americans. What does that mean for you and me macroeconomically? And then for you and me in our own microeconomic lives?
That America is not going to do as well in the future as those countries are. I mean, so they're going to do better than the GDP of America is going to be lower by comparison.
We would say this way in economics. We would say that our productivity looking into the future, which is based on the ability of people to produce using advanced technologies, our productivity is not going to be what it used to be. A lot of people say, well, if you look at the United States from 1945 till 1979, we were the most productive nation on earth. We produced more stuff, enjoyed faster growth in incomes, rising levels of standards of living better than any other country. Well, what was going on in 1945? World War II had ended. All of our major competitors like Germany and Japan had been bombed out of existence in terms of industrial capacity. And for the bulk of these years, we didn't have any competition. We didn't have to be really good. We were just there and we were the biggest. We did pretty good, but we did so without competition. Okay? Those days are past. Now we're seeing productive capacity, educational ability, technology in other countries surpassing ours. Macroeconomically, it means we're looking more and more at a future when we are mediocre in terms of productivity, incomes, and standard of living. I ran across this stat over the weekend in the state of Tennessee. And I don't have the citation on it, but the numbers stuck with me. In the state of Tennessee, of the male population under 25 years old, what percentage do you suppose have not gone to college? Or did not achieve at least a 2-year degree? 30% didn't go to college? Sound about right?
I think more than that.
More? How much more are you in?
I don't know, maybe around 50%.
50? The answer is 87%. 87% of the males under 25 in the state of Tennessee have no more than a high school diploma. Many of them don't even have the high school diploma. What does that portend for the productivity of the state of Tennessee? They're going to have trouble getting jobs. What does that portend for the state of Tennessee and its ability to collect taxes and provide police forces, emergency forces, roads? If you ain't making money, you ain't paying much taxes. What does that portend for the children of this generation, this 87%? What future do their children have? And going back to the same reinforcing effect, you talk about the 5 people in your life, what about the 5 people in those children's lives? It's going to be self-reinforcing. Nope, this is the way life is, you're not going to change it. So these are the kind of issues that are at play out there in our macro world that economics helps us look at and sometimes helps us talk about policies or things we can do to try to preclude or offset. Okay. I'm going to ask this question, and I'm going to ask somebody who hasn't spoken yet to answer, otherwise I'll start calling names. You ready? Show of hands real quick. How many of you read chapter 16? Okay. Can anybody here tell me what Baumol's disease is? Anybody? Sir?
Is it labor that doesn't improve over time?
It doesn't increase its productivity over time. Can you give me an example? Remember that in 1 or 2 over in the book?
I remember reading it. I can't remember.
Okay. Remember the guy cutting pins? We knew that if we put him together in an assembly line, well, we could improve that. We could increase the production of pins by quite a bit, right? What happened when Henry Ford came along with his assembly line production for automobiles? Instead of you and your crew of 4 built the car from bottom up every bit, we broke it into separate steps. You put on the wheels, you put on the brakes, you put on the steering wheel, and the thing comes down a production line. And what happened to the number of cars that 100 people could build in a year? It went from 100 to 1,000. That's an increase in productivity. Baumol, an economist, argues that as the United States has gone from a producing manufacturing economy more into services, we're not going to see that kind of increase in productivity. Now, what is a service economy? When we say most of the jobs in America today are in the service sector, what are we saying? What kind of jobs?
Building, making this stuff.
No, service. As opposed to manufacturing.
You sell a service instead of a product. So,
Give me some examples.
washing cars.
Washing cars, detailing cars,
Being a financial advisor.
being a financial advisor,
Teacher.
being a teacher, being a data entry clerk, being a statistician for a ball team, being a doctor, a lawyer, a dentist. Those are services. And what do we find about services, at least according to Mr. Baumol, which I think is fairly accurate? How many people can a doctor see in one day? If he could see 1 every 10 minutes, he could see 6 an hour, let's say over a 6-hour day. He can see 36 patients a day. You want to spend 10 minutes with your doctor? How long do you want to spend it? I want as much of his damn time as it needs for him to understand me and tell me what's going on, as well as how to fix me. 10 minutes is a damn short doctor's visit, but we're kind of close to that in a lot of places. How can you increase that doctor's productivity so that he sees 75 patients a day instead of 36?
Hire staff to help like prepare them.
Which doesn't, how should I say this? When I say how do we increase his productivity, I mean without adding any other costs. How do we get him to produce more? And yes, we can put more people through his office with better staff, some physician assistants or LPRNs.
Make the visit time short.
Huh?
Make the visit time.
And what happens when you start trying to shorten the visit time? What happens to the quality of care?
Goes down.
Goes down. Baumol is saying that in service businesses, it's hard to increase productivity. Somebody waiting tables, how many tables can you cover as wait staff in a nice restaurant? Anybody? Huh?
8, and that's really busy.
8 if you're not really busy. If it ever gets busy,
Then you're screwed.
oh, so much. So much. Anything over 4 and you're starting this stuff. Okay? How do you increase that productivity? You can't. It takes so much time to take care of that table. So many man minutes or man hours. If more of our jobs, and now we're talking 70-80% of our jobs, are in the service sector, and we can't increase the productivity in those areas, what are we going to do? The answer is we're going to pay more and more for service. So that's one of the issues going on in our economy. How long does it take to train someone to wait tables?
About a week and a half.
About a week and a half? How long does it take them to get really good at it?
Took me about 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah, because there are so many variables, so many different things that can happen, so many different kinds of people to work with. Okay. Back to Smith as we go along. You do want to do the readings on Canvas about capitalism et al., which is about capitalism, socialism, communism, fascism. Be sure you read all of those readings. You want to read about the Great Depression and the 6 factors that are outlined as having contributed to the Great Depression. How long is the average work week in America?
40. Oh,
How many hours?
40.
It's supposed to be 40 hours, right? But in the 1900s, how long was the average work week?
60.
60 hours. How did the work week become shorter?
Wages went up.
Labor unions.
Labor unions combined with technology. When people become more productive, you don't need them to work as long to produce the same amount of stuff. So you have labor unions representing workers saying, we don't want to work these long hours, we don't want to work in these unsafe conditions, we don't want to work for this lousy money. And then you had technology allowing businesses to become more profitable, able to afford some of that. So you have 2 things going on there. Is the average work week in America today 40 hours a week? Oh, does the average American work 40 hours a week? What do you think? About how much? The book said it's about 37 hours a week.
So, as time goes on, our work weeks are going to get shorter.
Well, the latest survey I read, which came out last week, the average American reporting on the survey says, I work 47 hours a week. 47, not 37. And I think that's a phenomenon that's been going on for the last 5 years. What's been going on?
Managers work 50 hours a week, 40 to 60 hours a week.
There is a level of manager, first level manager, where we put them into management so they're now exempt from overtime, and then we work them to death. Look at anybody managing a Pizza Hut or something like that, retail stores. But what's been going on since in the last 5 years, since 2009, 2008?
And the cost of things gone up, but wages haven't adjusted.
What's happened is we've had a recession. A recession means your customers disappear, you start laying off your workers to cut your costs. And pretty soon, where you used to have 20 people working in your business, you're now working with 5. How hard are those 5 people working? They're doing the work of the 20. Now, probably you didn't even need 20. Probably you could have done it on 15, but you're still doing 15 people's work with 5 people. Those 5 people are not working 40-hour weeks. A lot of the people who kept their jobs through this recession and still have them today, their life changed because they had to take on more and more duties from people that were getting laid off. Okay? So today, the reported response is, I work an average of 47 hours a week. I would tell you right now, coming out of college, if I was looking at a job, I would be locked in my mind 55 to 60 hours a week is what it's going to take to succeed. And if you are willing to engage and really work at it for 55 or 60 hours a week, what will we find? You don't have a hell of a lot of competition. Because there's a whole bunch of other people out there that are adamantly opposed to working anything more than their 40 hours. They will not come in early, they will not stay late, they will not work weekends because, by God, that's not in my contract. What's their upward potential? Non-existent. Okay? So what I'm telling you is be aware of what's going on out there, adjust your own performance standards to suit that. You can excel at anything you want to do. Because the level of competition out there is not going to be very high. The other thing, and it's called the Pareto rule, another economist. We name all kinds of things after economists. The Pareto rule. Sometimes you hear it called the 80-20 rule. In an organization of 100 people, it is probable that 20 of the people in that organization really make it happen. And the other 80 just go through the day. If I sell coffee for a living, it is probable that 80% of my coffee sales, 80% of my sales come from 20% of my customers. The people who drink a lot of coffee. We call them the heavy half. The heavy half, the heavy users, the heavy producers. If you look at college campuses, what percentage of the professors really put their heart and soul into it, really interact a lot, really do a lot of course development, etc.? I don't know if it's 80-20 or if it's 70-30 or 60-40, but I think that there's a heavy half. I'm sorry? Well, then there would be a 10-90, but yeah. And it's true anywhere you go. The majority of people out there are doing just enough to get by. Sometimes because they're lazy, sometimes because they don't know any better. But the fact is, if you do know better, they're not competition for you. You can outperform them in a heartbeat. Okay? So, one last contemporary note, and then we'll see if there's anything else out of the textbook. But we're pretty close. Can anyone here tell me what the Affordable Care Act is? Affordable Care Act. Ever heard of that?
I've heard of it.
Anybody ever heard of it? Know what it is? One for sure. Three probably, maybe. Can anyone here tell me what Medicaid versus Medicare is? What is Medicare? It's health care provided through the Social Security, or provided through your payments on payroll taxes to people over 65 years old, 65 years and older. Okay. Medicare for the old folks. Boy, I hate that. I'm not that damn old, but I do qualify. Medicaid. Medicaid is federal health care for low income. Okay? The Affordable Care Act is also known more popularly as Obamacare. Okay? Obamacare looked at the point made in the textbook. Our health care costs are going through the roof. And there's a few reasons for that. One is we got more old people. Two is we're paying doctors for how many things they do for you instead of whether or not they fixed you. Got issues like that. But another major contributor to health care costs, people who don't have health care insurance, when they break a leg or twist an arm, where do they go for care? The emergency room. They don't have a doctor. Doctor won't see them. They don't have insurance. They go to the emergency room. What does it cost to go in and get your sprained ankle, sprained wrist treated at the emergency room? Huh?
Like $20,000.
Anywhere from a couple thousand up, okay? Depending on what's wrong with you, how many lab tests we got to do, etc. It's very expensive to treat people in the emergency room for two reasons. One is they probably waited till the last minute to come in for help, And if we could have treated them earlier, before this thing really became a problem, we could have treated them quickly, cheaply, and much more to their comfort. And the second thing is, just by virtue of creating an emergency room with all those doctors and nurses that staff it and all that equipment, care there is much more expensive. Obamacare was trying to get a lot of people out of that emergency room and into some insurance. And part of what Obamacare did was say, based on your situation and how much money you earn, you must have insurance. If you make too little money way down here, you're exempt. But if you make between here and here or over this level, you have to have insurance. And it said each state can set up their own insurance exchange where you can buy your insurance. And if your state won't set it up, then the federal government will provide it for that state. And a lot of states run by Republicans were very opposed to Obama and anything he did, and they refused to set up their own state exchange, and so people went to the federal exchange. What we are now discovering, this was in the paper Sunday or Saturday, the states that refuse to set up their own exchanges are now finding that they have literally millions of citizens with no insurance. And the cost of now having to provide that for them is going through the roof. One of those big states, Texas. Another big state, Florida. Insurance costs for Floridians are going to go through the roof, in large part because they resisted that Obamacare, and now since it has gone ahead and gone through and is becoming more and more popular around the country, states like Florida are left behind, and we're waiting to see how much money that's going to cost us, but the estimates are in the millions of dollars.
Didn't Florida have, like, I remember going online to the Florida website. Did they still have it set up, though?
They have one set up, but it goes through the federal exchange.
Oh.
So I would suggest to you, based on Chapter 16 and the discussion about, future performance in our economy, take a look at what's going on in the healthcare area and listen to the arguments both from the Republicans, why they're so opposed to Obamacare, and from the other side, and why they think it's the best thing since canned beer. Okay? But the bottom line, at least to me, is this. We're all in this together. If we don't all get health care early when we have minor problems, and you don't have any other way to pay for it, I have to pay for your expensive health care. We collectively have to pay for your expensive health care for not having health insurance. I'm not sure that's real fair. I'm not sure that all of us shouldn't be contributing in some way to help pay for all of our health care. Something to think about. I'd love to hear your feedback, discussions based on any kind of research or reading that you do. Now, the things we didn't discuss today, again, capitalism, socialism, communism, we want to go through that. Production possibilities curves. Make sure you take a look at that before next class. And then one important, well, no, I will be here Wednesday. Okay, Wednesday we'll pick up a couple of those topics at that time. Anything else? Sir?
I actually watched a video about the healthcare industry and why it's so expensive.
Uh-huh.
And they're talking about how in America, because we don't have we don't have a lot of regulations on prices,
Right.
that they can charge like what they charge like $27 for a 30-day prescription in New Zealand. They can charge like $80 or $90 in America.
Oh, yeah, it's worse than that. One of them was a high cholesterol type prescription that around in the United States it would cost you $338 a month. And if you went to New Zealand for the exact same prescription, it was $65 a month. Why? Because their government runs their healthcare system, which means their government buys all the medicine for everybody. So when their government goes to Roche Pharmaceutical and says, we need some of this medicine and we're going to buy this much of it, they can argue for a much lower price, and they get it. So that's one of the arguments the Democrats made about a more centralized healthcare system. We do have the finest healthcare system in the world, for the people that can afford it. But if you look at our infant mortality rate, the rate at which babies die, ours is one of the highest in the developed world. When you look at the child poverty rate, we have a larger percentage of children in poverty than any country in the world. Why? I want to take that whole concept back to the wealth of nations. Are we truly a wealthy nation? If we measure it per person, on the average, we look pretty good. But if we take a little deeper look at it and say what's going on at the bottom half compared to the top half, we see a real different story. And those are the kind of issues and articles I hope you'll expose yourself to and bring to class and discuss. All right? Thank you. Bye.